On September 12, 2001, when the whole world was still shocked with the horrifying 9/11 attacks on America, something happened that the world was not prepared for. September was already a nightmare for the United States, and this breathtaking incident of the 12th was gonna make things only worse. While the whole nation was sleeping, a group of scientists were preparing their plans to complete their exhibition in the dangerous yet so beautiful jungles of Myanmar. With the leader of the team, Joseph Slowinski, the group went into the jungles with only one mission: to analyze everything they find. Snakes, plants, insects, trees, birds, it didn't matter. However, the team, especially Joseph, had no clue what was coming for him and how his fate would take a steep turn right on that day. As the famous herpetologist went to capture a completely harmless snake with a specimen bag, a different, more intimate type of tragedy happened. In this video, we will be taking a look at Joseph's deadly encounter with what he loved the most and the desperate attempts of his friends to keep the man alive during his last minutes. Beginning his exciting herpetological journey in Myanmar in 1997, Joseph Slowinski had discovered 18 new species of reptiles in the dense jungles. During his expeditions, nothing could stand between his determination and devotion towards his field research and the thrill he got from contributing to science. Every time Joseph felt like he lacked some thrill and adventure, he was back to Myanmar. However, when the man was starting his latest expedition in early September 2001, he had to face so many challenges along the way. For example, Joseph had been working on this September expedition for so long, but he believed that another scientist who was working in Burma was blocking his original fundings, leaving Joseph to cobble funds from different sources so he could finally start his field research. And that's why when he gathered a multidisciplinary team of 10 academics, he gave them a fair warning before the start of the project. Slowinski had to continue his research while simultaneously managing his team of academics in more than 90 borders, carrying their supplies. And surprisingly, although Joseph had paid a generous amount of money to make sure no one would go hungry, the quantity of the supplies was significantly scarce. In that expedition, there was a Burmese who was handling all the operations and problems, but he couldn't and wouldn't act without Joseph's permission. And finally, when the team was ready to start, there came the biggest hurdle in the way. Earlier, the Myanmar government had promised to send 2 military doctors and a radio phone to accompany the scientists and ensure that everyone is safe while exploring the dense and horrifying jungles. But when it was required, there was no sign of it. Somehow, the project started. The team involved some of Joseph's students, as well as some of other herpetologists, ornithologists, entomologists, and some Burmese students too. The latter were able to join the expedition because of Slowinski's effort to teach and train local biologists in DNA systematics and museum curation techniques to improve conservation efforts in Myanmar. Finally, the trip began and the scientists advanced further and further away from local civilization and towards the dense jungle that would ultimately decide Joseph's fate. As the team reached deep into the jungle, it turned out that Joseph was right with his warnings. The task was indeed very difficult. It was raining heavily and the weather was literally miserable. The ground had become too sticky with mud and it made every step a big challenge for the team, especially when the task was to climb 10,000 feet while also analyzing a vast variety of habitats. Each day, as the team progressed, different types of animals, no matter whether they were frogs, snakes, or anything else, were captured and meticulously analyzed. The in-house photographer, who was also a very good friend of Joseph, took some stunning pictures of these fascinating creatures. Every night, when the team would return to its camp, everyone would talk about the day's catches, the challenges, and their desires for the next day. However, according to Mark Muffett, a tropical biologist who was also a part of the expedition, it seemed the hardships of managing that research were slowly catching up with Joseph. Just a day before what would turn out to be Slowinski's final encounter with snakes, the expedition's leader seemed to miss his usual excitement and vivacity. That day, he walked inactively and his fingers shook with every little movement of their own. It looked like his fate was already indicating to him what was to come. Then came September 11th, and the entire world trembled with those massive attacks on the USA. The research team trembled that day too, but for entirely different reasons. On the morning of the 11th, the team was at the bottom of a foggy jungle valley in a very small remote village known as Ratball. At around 7 a.m. in the morning, a Burmese field assistant brought a snake enclosed in a specimen bag to Slowinski. And although there were many versions of what was said in that morning, it can be generalized that the assistant told Joseph that he had been bitten by a specimen of the same species the day before. Reportedly, the Burmese assistant didn't know the exact species of that snake, but he believed it to be a non-venomous one. And responding to that, Slowinski did something that no one had expected, not even himself. Despite having so many years of experience in handling snakes and his well-formed safety habits, Slowinski reached into the bag with his bare hands without even thinking about it once, and suddenly, he felt a sharp and quick tiny bit on his hand. When he looked down inside the bag, he saw a foot-long pencil-thin snake which perfectly resembled a multi-banded krait. The misunderstanding of the field assistant was understandable, but the snake that bit Joseph didn't just resemble a krait, it was a real one, and particularly a heavily venomous snake. As soon as the snake bit him on the hand, Joseph realized what had happened to him, but still, he didn't lose hope. After all, he had so much experience in the field, and this wasn't even his first encounter with a poisonous snake. He had already been bitten by a cobra in the past October, but that was a dry bite, a bit without venom. He was also bitten by a spitting cobra once, that too in his eyes, and if it were not for the local people in Burma, he would have lost his eyesight within a matter of time. Joseph would think in all this within the seconds after krait had bit him, but he remained in high spirits, at least from the outside. He had also checked for bite marks, but couldn't find any. Later that day, he sat with his team for breakfast, and everyone enjoyed it with lots of laughter and joy. After that, he went to take a quick nap before continuing the further expedition. When he woke up at around 8 a.m., he felt a slight tingling in his arm, and being an expert, the man instantly knew this was bad news. Snake venom contains very powerful neurotoxins that cause loss of motor skills. 15 minutes after he had felt the tingling, Joseph sent 2 assistants to the nearest town with a radio to call for help, but all their tries went in vain, since the Myanmar government had forbidden satellite cell phones and didn't even provide the team with a radio as promised. Finally, knowing that he had lost the game, Joseph gathered his team and explained to them what was going to happen in detail. According to multiple statements given by different team members, each one of Joseph's predictions came true. First, his breathing became raspy. He had to reach up just to open his eyelids. Gradually, his head began to droop, and even his speech became unstable. And in the end, he couldn't speak at all. He wrote messages to his team, asking them to support his head and adjust his position. He wrote, "If I vomit, it could be bad." And then suddenly, his diaphragm stopped working. Before he lost his speech, he told the assistants that they would have to breathe for him if he were to survive. He also told them that the neurotoxins might leave his body after 48 hours. At 3 p.m., the 2 assistants returned to the camp with bad news. The Myanmar military wanted more information before sending a helicopter to rescue Slowinski. And to make things even worse, heavy rains made it even more difficult for the pilots to land the helicopter in that area. Soldiers and a military doctor arrived on foot, but they had brought an old respirator which no one could get to work. Instead, during this tense moment, the team showed great courage and took turns to breathe for their mentor throughout the night for 26 long hours. However, it all came to a stop on 12 September 2001 at around 12:25, when Joseph's pulse was gone. The helicopter finally landed, but now it was too late. The world had already lost one of its greatest and most courageous herpetologists that day. As requested, Joseph's body was cremated and his ashes were flown back to San Francisco. Joseph Slowinski's death was a massive upset for the entire scientist community and the herpetology world. He is still renowned for his devotion and enthusiasm in his work. He died doing what he loved the most, and perhaps he wasn't even scared of death after all. As a tribute, 3 new reptile species have been named after him since his departure, and he truly deserved it. Like the video if you found it interesting. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep getting more inspiring true stories on your feed.